Wa da da da, la da da da. All right. Oh boy.
Just how I learned the lesson that everyone's alone, and your eyes must do some raining if you're ever gonna grow.
Soren Kierkegaard, The Sickness Unto Death. And you don't have any idea the amount of self-control it took for me not to use disturbed there for no good reason. You know what? Fuck it. Run it back. There. Now we're in the right headspace to tackle Kierkegaard, who is probably my favorite philosopher. Like all people, like all philosophers, I don't agree with everything he says. Because I'm not a fucking cult follower. I find it weird that people have to say things like that. Like, no, I don't agree with everything. Well, I hope not. I hope there's not a single human being on the planet that you agree with 100%. That would be insane, man. That would be fucking crazy. And I'm fucking crazy. I'm the one telling you this. That'd be way more crazy than me. The Sickness Unto Death is brilliant, considered a masterful late work from Kierkegaard. It is an investigation and exploration of despair as a lived reality, as a concept that can feel overwhelming, infinite, and unending. Along with Tolstoy's religious writings, I think it's the greatest piece of, or one of the greatest pieces, along with Kierkegaard's. Okay, fuck it, fuck you words. Along with Tolstoy's religious writings, and obviously Fear and Trembling, and certainly Either or. The Sickness Unto Death is one of the greatest pieces of Christian existentialism ever. It's truly the foundational text of what would come to be known popularly as existentialism, the form of existentialism that Camus and Sartre and de Beauvoir were so devoted to. I even see post-structuralist in here as well. So like Guy Debord, Foucault, Jacques Derrida, so many things, right? Like I think there's post-structuralism here as well. This might be the most influential piece of philosophy that was ever written. You know, I'd like to argue that because there's a part where Kierkegaard's talking about the self, and of course, despair is ultimately the name for the condition of for when we lose ourself, or when our self is lost from God. Despair is when the self is broken, and the self is this dynamic thing. The self for Kierkegaard is not a static being. The self for Kierkegaard is dynamic becoming. It's constantly moving, which that momentum of self, that unpredictable momentum of self, can cause despair in and of itself. But when Kierkegaard is explaining what the self is, it's I think it's comedy, personally. I think he's being deliberately overcomplicated, but since I've read The Society of the Spectacle 4 times, I completely understood what he was saying. There it is. Yes, right at the beginning too. The self is a relation which relates to itself, or that in the relation which is its relating to itself. The self is not the relation, but the relations relating to itself. A human being is a synthesis of the infinite and the finite, of the temporal and the eternal, of freedom and necessity. In short, a synthesis. A synthesis is a relation between two terms. Looked at this way, a human being is not yet a self. Now, I think that honestly, I think that what Kierkegaard did there is deeply ironic. I think he's overcomplicating the idea of the self in order to make grander points about how most other philosophers kind of measure the immeasurable, which truly is the self. And I think that the idea that you could possibly measure the self outside of God, that certainly could fuel or could even give birth to despair. Well, what gives birth to despair is all of those relations, right? The fact that human beings are relational things. So just like Guy Debord would later talk about how life has been replaced by a series of representations, Kierkegaard is more the self is dynamically being replaced by relations upon relations, relationships upon relationships, ourselves in relation to all other things, all other moods, all other ideas, and certainly in relation to eternity. Like that's what causes like the complete schism or break if you are a fatalist or a predeterminist. The schism, the absolute despairing schism, the paradox is certainly the relation to eternity, since the self is comprised of relations upon relations. Much like the post-structuralists would say, life has become a series of representations upon representations. Now, postmodernists and post-structuralists would probably go on to say, well, I know they would go on to say that life has been replaced by a series of representations, that experience itself has been replaced by the representations of experience. Now, I don't know if Kierkegaard would go that far, unless he's fully exploring the despairing fatalist, honestly. He might say that the fatalist's despair is a thousandfold, considering that his relations upon relations have been multiplied to such a severe degree that, just like he talks about folklore, this knight going off to find this bird and can't find his way back. If you spend so much time investigating all the different relations that you have, you could often get lost of the relation that matters most, which is your relation to God, your relation to the infinite, your relation to faith, your relation to the eternal. The sickness unto death is a fascinating philosophical work. I think it's like really fucking great. Hell, I think that as bipolar readers, which I am a bipolar reader, my name is Zach, I have bipolar 1 disorder. Kierkegaard, writing under the pseudonym, he wrote synonymously quite a bit, under the pseudonym Anti-Climacus. His this is a pretty good this is worth listening to, everybody. The biggest danger, that of losing oneself, can pass off in the world as quietly as if it were nothing. Every other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, etc., is bound to be noticed. I think as people who struggle with their mental health or have mental illnesses like bipolar disorder, major depression, schizoaffective, just anxiety in general, stress, we can relate to that concept quite a bit. Where I would disagree with Kierkegaard is where he goes on to call despair a sin. Though I do want to play defense for Kierkegaard a little bit, because he does say that, you know, despair, everyone is a little sick with despair. Everyone has despair or experiences despair. And I would also posit that he says that like depression, grief, sadness, those are all normal parts of the human experience. Where Kierkegaard's sin of despair comes in is it's a sin to despair if you are cognizant, if you recognize God and you still refuse to be relational to God, and you still refuse a relationship to God, considering that God is truly what provides you with your actual self. Ultimately, there are parts of Kierkegaard that tell you to recognize that you are in despair, repent, trust God, live faithfully. Now, of course, living in true faith for a Kierkegaardian is quite a large process of human experience. In order to do that, you need to accept your true self. Instead of trying to become someone else or denying who you are, you should accept yourself as God has made you or created you to be. Despair is sinful because that is when the self refuses to be relational to God, yet recognizes that it is relational to God. It's a direct refusal to trust the God that provides us with our identity. At that point, it's not merely suffering, and at that point, it's not simply despair. It's a broken relationship with God. And that's what Kierkegaard would truly call sinful within despair. But there's something like, even if you're a non believer, which is totally cool, I don't care. Even if you're a non believer, what we can all take away from Kierkegaard's view of the self is to keep in mind that the self is dynamic and that the self is affected by everything that the self experiences. And that as we try to self author, we lose sight of the pen itself with which we are using to write ourselves. There are so many paradoxes when it comes to cultivating, to forming, to creating our own selves, that eventually eternity does seem to be, or does seem to provide the most, the greatest cessation to despair. If God is difficult for you to believe in, well, firstly, I would ask you to reconsider, but I'm sure you've considered and reconsidered over and over again until it's made you positively, spiritually, devastatingly nauseous. Well, let's look at it differently. What Kierkegaard hates most is certainty, not only in the sickness unto death, but also in fear and trembling. His Knight of Faith is heroic primarily because he rejects certainty. He rejects fatalism. He rejects predeterminism and believes that in God all things are possible, even getting the Anya Taylor-Joy looking like princess, right? Getting that completely unattainable princess. Everything is possible. Anything is possible with God. With God, anything is possible. So with God, anything is possible. I believe that certainty is the root of most despair, if not all of despair. Certainty, non-committal to certainty in all of its forms, is the root cause of all despair, and Kierkegaard would agree with me symbolically. It's difficult not to use words like faith when talking about Kierkegaard, since true faith is truly central to the Kierkegaardian philosophy. But possibility. You cannot lose sight of possibilities, and you must believe in those possibilities. Oh, Charlie. Hate it when you fall over, brother. You must believe wholeheartedly in those possibilities. Fatalism, certainty. What other than certainty is the author of suicide? That, I ask you. Suicide is wrought by those who are certain of outcomes. That they're either too severe to experience, too boring to experience. Kierkegaard was also a philosopher who hated the concept of boredom, or at least credited boredom with why people can be so aesthetic, hedonistic, and nihilistic, therefore certain. But what authors more suicides than certainty? I would call certainty the true author of suicide itself. It's normally an action performed by those who believe that the future holds nothing but sadness, depression, and torture, which is certainty. They're certain of that future. Or they're certain that the future just has numbness, has nothing to provide, just has more and more of the same repetitive boredom. And boredom can give way to anguish. Anguish gives way to despair. There is no one who kills themselves who is not in despair. And no one kills themselves because they are uncertain. Certainty is the author of suicide. And certainty I would call Kierkegaard's greatest conceptual villain. The Knight of Faith. His entire thing is rejecting certainty, because through God, all things are possible. And in the sickness unto death, the ultimate cure that Kierkegaard provides is faith. But faith in the absurd, faith in the impossible, faith in the insane. And that's something that bipolar readers, that readers who have mental illness can certainly learn a lot from. Oh, I have been so depressed that I've definitely, yeah, I've been real close to death. In depressive episodes for me, they are dominated by certainty. Now, I disagree with Kierkegaard that despair is a sin. Obviously, despair, especially the kind of despair that can lead one to not simply suicidal ideations, but suicide attempts. I've been there. You've likely been there yourself. That's not sinful. That's mental illness isn't a sin. But this book was written before bipolar disorder was a proper diagnosis. And to run defense for Kierkegaard, I don't think he would have been talking about clinical depression in that case. And Kierkegaard clearly knows nothing of mania. Mania is entirely unpredictable. That's why mania scares me so much. But here's something that I would like to pontificate about, probably, when it comes to mania. My mania is really dangerous. My mania is very unpredictable. My relationship with God is new, and I work hard to manage and maintain it, to truly believe and truly live within true faith, as Kierkegaard would describe it. I try very hard. But there's this pit of my core. I spent such a long time as a fatalist, as a post-structuralist, postmodernist, nihilist, more than an atheist, far more than an atheist. I spent such a long time rebelling against religion in all of its myriad forms that there are still remnants of nihilism within me. When I go manic, the true moral aesthetic of nihilism takes over my entire body and psyche. When I'm manic, I'm trying to get myself killed in the most cartoonish way that could only be compared to a spectacle. Like, that's how I'm trying to die. And that's despair. That's nihilism, fatalism. That's the sickness unto death. That is despair. And perhaps, and this is what I'm theorizing, perhaps if I didn't have that despair, even when I'm stable, if I didn't have that despair just when I'm feeling entirely neutral emotionally, then when there's a charge, when there is a hypomanic or manic episode, if I didn't have that despair, if I was cured of that despair, then the mania would still happen, but maybe the mania wouldn't be so fucking dangerous and scary because it wasn't operating solely on the orders of nihilism, of the remnants of it. Like, it wasn't blasting off into the abyss on the jet fuel of certainty, of chaotic certainty. I think that in our more normal states, we do experience Kierkegaard's version of despair, his understanding of despair. And if we could work on remedying, curing the despair that we feel normally, then when depression or mania happens, and they certainly will happen, and neither one is a sinful occurrence, but when they do happen, if we don't have, if we're not despairing normally, then perhaps those two episodes wouldn't be so intense. That's what I'm really saying here. That if we can face despair head on when we're feeling more or less stable, and we can work to fix that which is disabling us emotionally, then when we have an episode that we can't help but slip into, if the despair isn't really there, then perhaps those episodes will be easier to manage or sedate. There are a lot of things we can work on through philosophy, even when we are struggling with mental disorders. I know a lot of people who have mental disorders, especially bipolar disorder, who refuse to engage with philosophy like Kierkegaard. Simply because of these things that I'm talking about, because it's normally written at a time where a lot of people didn't understand depression clinically, or didn't care to understand depression clinically. Very different times, yet most of what they talk about is depression. And, they speak so broadly that there doesn't seem to be any nuance for mental illness in there. So like I understand when other bipolar readers or other people have schizoaffective disorder, when other people read these books, they're like, "Oh, this is kind of low key offensive." Right, like he's not talking to me, he doesn't understand me, and Kierkegaard calls me sinful. Like I think that's honestly, I think if you're reading that as a bipolar reader, you're being very insecure and you need to work on your insecurities. You should be able to read philosophy and be able to interact with it without losing your fucking mind or centering yourself above all other concepts. Like you need to work on that insecurity. I think that bipolar people should absolutely. Sorry, there's something fucking moved over there. It's like a ghost. The ghost of Sylvia Plath coming to kick my ass for calling bipolar readers insecure. I deserve it, but I think that bipolar readers could learn a lot from philosophy and ought to learn a lot through philosophy. Just because Kierkegaard or Nietzsche or Sartre, for that matter, doesn't understand your the clinical notes from the last time you were in a psychiatric hospital. The fact that you're bipolar doesn't give you the license to just let yourself go mentally, psychologically, emotionally. Like just because you have bipolar disorder doesn't mean that you don't have to work on some kind of loathsome despair that you carry with you. You can't just go, "Oh, my depression is clinical, therefore it transcends all philosophies." No, it fucking doesn't. It does not. It does not. And if you're unwilling to work with philosophy, then that just shows an insecurity and a stubbornness on your part. In fact, it shows a despair of the self that would mean you really need to read this book. The Sickness Unto Death, I think, is one of the most fascinating philosophical texts in the world. Probably the greatest investigation into the self, especially when we're speaking about foundational existentialist texts. As Christian philosophies, it's basically second to none. And yeah, Kierkegaard is likely my favorite philosopher because he provides this sort of discourse, right? Because I find him so challenging. And because he's right about the self. The self is relational to all other things. And what truly breaks the self, what truly impairs or injures the self, is when the self's relationship with God, how it relates to God, is broken. Faith is honestly the way to repair the self, or the way to truly have a true self through true faith, because God is the one who gives us not only our self or our identity, but our life. And our self is truly our God-given identity and our God-given lives. Sickness Unto Death, beautiful philosophical text. I love it so much. And yeah, I think it's just simply important for people who have mental disorders to engage with ideas, all sorts of ideas and all sorts of philosophers. I'm an advocate for bipolar disorder, for mental health, absolutely, but I'm also an advocate for personal responsibility when it comes to managing your mental health, to improving your mental health. I think that so many people are just like, well, fuck, I have major depressive disorder, I have schizoaffective disorder, I have bipolar disorder. Therefore, I'm just spiraling out. Nothing I can fucking do. I'm just going to eat this food and walk a certain amount of miles a day or steps or whatever. I'm just going to do the bare minimum. I'm going to work on everything but my fucking brain, but my worldview, but myself, and how myself is a representation of every relationship that I have, how I'm relational to all things, all ideas, all concepts, all foods, all steps taken. I'm never going to engage with that. If you never engage philosophically, if you never try to improve yourself philosophically, you're never going to get truly better. And that's what I'm advocating for here. Personal responsibility. Yeah, eat better. Yeah, be more active. Do all the things that, like, the people who are way too hot to actually have bipolar disorder severely tell you to do on Instagram Reels. Do all of that stuff. But I think what's a lot more important than that is to address things that are going on up here confrontationally too. Don't just fucking consume the most sanitized philosophy that could fit on a fucking birthday card, dude. Like, don't do that. You need serious, mature, confrontational philosophy that can be difficult to swallow, difficult to digest, yet entirely life altering. There's a part here where Kierkegaard's going through all the different selves, all the different ways that we despair over ourself, like all the different ways. And it's pretty cool. There's this one that's like the isolated self. If you isolate yourself from the world, and also I'm going to add from the world of ideas and philosophy, if you isolate yourself from that, then your closest confidant is suicide. Now, if you just let even like one person to come in, like one philosophy to enter into your self-imposed isolation, then that does wonders on mending the self, or at least for making suicide itself go away. Now, there are ways you could be a tyrant in this situation. Imagine a king. Kierkegaard says, imagine a king who needs to confide in one person about the despair that he feels. He does so, then afterwards he consumes him. Afterwards, he has him executed, right? That comes down to how the self constantly tries to consume itself, because the self is dynamic. The self is constantly trying to consume itself, and it will consume itself if you have nothing truly foundational there. And without engaging with confrontational, sophisticated philosophy, all your philosophy will do is consume itself over and over and over again, until yourself becomes so isolated from the world of ideas and from, I think, genuine people, that yes, suicide becomes your closest confidant, or at least suicide becomes the philosophy that you will next consume. Yes, I'm speaking melodramatically. Kierkegaard was extremely melodramatic. This book is also quite funny at times. There's morbid irony throughout. And of course, as a romantic, I think this book is emotionally vivid. But this is serious. This is serious stuff. Philosophy should be treated like it matters. If we're going to talk about philosophy, let's act as if it mattered, because it does matter. Philosophy matters. And the sickness unto death matters more than most philosophy books do. All right. Thanks for watching me. Bye for now.